So excited to have Kevin here this morning. I'm going to introduce Kevin a little bit here. And as you know, Bobby and Kevin were IIR, well, Bobby still is an IIR instructor, but Kevin and his wife, Barbara, have been actually working with reflexology, teaching it, sharing it for over 40 years. Now, if you combine that, that's like an 80-year collective energy into reflexology, and we applaud you, Barbara and Kevin, for all that you've done. It's amazing. They are recognized as international speakers and authors, and they're just authorities in reflexology all over the world. They've written over 22 books, and they are published in multiple languages and 60 foreign editions, which is phenomenal and truly an international inspiration for us. Throughout their profession, they have collected research studies on reflexology and created an amazing webpage. I don't know if how many of you are familiar with that. It's on the bottom, kevinkunz.com. And on there, you can look up a pathology or condition, and it will show what research that has been done on that particular condition. So that is amazing. Thank you so much for collecting all of that. So their most recent tireless efforts to further improve the scientific validity of reflexology has finally come to fruition for them. And they have embarked on this MRI study of the brain while people or the subjects are receiving a reflexology treatment. And what they're doing is they're observing and recording the neural pathways. And so to date right now, this was his stage one part of the project, and they collected over 3,000 MRI images of the brain. So the results have been incredible. And we are so blessed. Thank you, Kevin, so much to have you here this morning with us. And we thank you, Bobby, for inviting him again. And we're just looking so forward to hearing more about this fantastic project and the discoveries that you are doing. Now, this costs money, guys. So, show your love and appreciation. There are several ways to contribute, and I will post this in the chat so you can copy it there. But these are several things. The work is being done in the new University of New Mexico. Has a fund page going up. The second one there is a GoFundMe page where you can do that. And for all of us old timers who like to write checks, that's what I like to do. I like to get it right to the person. I kind of like that. But make sure there's a number 203379 that you want to make sure that's on the check or with a note so that it goes to the right project.
Barbara is joining me today. Barbara's been my partner for years and years and years. So yeah, we're both going to be talking and kind of going through all this. And I want to thank you very, very much for this opportunity to speak to you all. And Bobby's been a good friend for a lot of years. And we were in IRR. I'll get it. My tongue needs a washing. At any rate, so it's been years and years and years. And we've all been on this trail. And I'd like to start with kind of a concept. And my concept is that, there's little moments in life that make big changes. And so, when my mother was working in Boston, she got her foot stuck in a tramway door, and my father rescued her, and that started their romance, which ended up with me. And if that hadn't happened, I might not have been here. Barbara and I have been through a lot of experiences together, but one of which was a major event for us, and it really did change the definition of reflexology. But we were working with a young quadriplegic. And as I was working on his left foot, Barbara was working on his hands, and she could feel his fingers move. And so that started us on a whole trail about how to explain reflexology within the nervous system. Don't get me wrong, I did judo. I understand energy and chi and ki or whatever. But what I'm saying is we now have an explanation within the nervous system. But we all know you've changed a lot of lives with what you've done. You've changed lives, you've saved lives, you've made lives better. And so this is why we're so excited about this event that's about to take place. At any rate, Dr. Posse came through my door at my office, and I could see his eyes were rolling, and it was kind of like I knew I had a skeptic on my hands. And so luckily I can speak brain, so it started not only a collaboration, but it also started a friendship. And I record our conversations because they get quite nerdy, to be honest with you. And at any rate, he is the one who proposed this protocol. He proposed this research project, and he's well known, and he's worldwide recognition as far as his work with. And by the way, it's not an MRI. It's a functional MRI. There's a difference. An MRI is going to see what's going on in the inside of your body. A functional MRI, it's going to look at the structure, whereas a functional MRI really has to do with the function of the brain. We get to peer inside the brain and see what happens as we work on feet or hands or whatever. I'm just basically saying this is just a door we're about to go through. And the reason why that door is so important is that basically we've been looked down on, we've been ridiculed. Barbara and I were put out of business for 5 years in Albuquerque. We would have had to gone to a local massage school and taken training in our own book. You get skeptical. We've had research projects because of the bias against reflexology torpedoed, and so forth and so on. Here's our opportunity now. Here's our chance to go through that door. We're at a crossroads. We can go the way we've been going, which, it's been rewarding in a lot of ways and so forth, but we haven't gotten the respect or the prestige or even the money. If we enter this door, we're going to be entering the door where we're a medical practice. We're also a scientific approach. Now, Barbara and I are working on phase 3 of this, and Barbara will explain the different phases to you. But phase 3, we're going to actually do functional MRIs as we're working on a stroke patient. So as you apply pressure, they can actually go to the screen and see how it lights up. At any rate, this week, we had some really interesting results, and all we were doing was doing a dry run on functional MRIs are very expensive. We're talking $450 an hour. And so we're doing a dry run so we could be prepared and know what we're going to do before we actually start scanning, which hopefully is going to start in a couple of weeks. At any rate, so we had a gentleman in, he had had a stroke. And so Stefan, I don't have neuroscience scientists in on my sessions at all. So this was something different. And so he was sitting in there taking notes and asking questions and so forth and so on. And so I worked for 45 minutes on the protocol I've used in the past for stroke. And it was kind of hard because he was not completely paralyzed. He had some movement. So it's a little hard to determine whether you're making an improvement or not. But just then I ended up working on an area where suddenly the paralyzed side, the foot started to spasm. I didn't think anything of that. That's happened all the time throughout the years. But at any rate, Stefan immediately said, "Oh, you got movement." Well, we thought we had to produce voluntary movement. We didn't understand that even involuntary movement had an impact. And so this makes our trip to Minnesota, which is where we're scanning at this point, much easier because we can. So the next person who came along, which was just yesterday, paralyzed as well, hemiplegic. He had paralysis on one side. And so right away, I got him to move. This was a little different. This wasn't as spasmodic. It was just a kind of a slow and gradual eversion or turning into the foot and a retraction of the leg and so forth. And you're going, is that all you want? So we can produce that result. So we have a little money left over from phase 1, and we can start scanning right away up in University of Minnesota. And by the way, the reason why we're up there is they have 11 scanners versus New Mexico, which has one for the whole state. At any rate, so we learned something new this week, and that's what I love about reflexology. You're always learning something. There's always new discoveries. And the fascinating part now that we've been on, the internet, and I've now got 4,000 friends. I don't know them, but apparently they follow reflexology, so they're interested in joining up. It's everywhere. This morning we hit 64 countries. Iran just came in, and so there's 14 African countries. We're from the Himalayas, from Nepal all the way into Mozambique, all throughout Europe, all throughout South America, and it's everywhere. And the really interesting part is there's a lot of variants and so forth. I'm a footman. That's my prejudice. That's how I got started. And so, but I also recognize, there's all kinds of different approaches. Now we got a chance to test them. So we can move from being opinion. My opinion is I've got the greatest techniques in the world. We can move from that to facts. And so when we did our first scan, it's called a proof of concept. And Barbara's going to go into the phases of this research project. But a proof of concept is basically showing the validity of reflexology. Hallelujah. This is what we've been looking for. When we get that validation, we move on. And then we move on into science. There's a lot of very positive aspects of this where we get the type of attention we really deserve. And all of you fought for years and years and years. And you've had, I call it the eye roll, where people look at you, oh yeah, you're doing that crazy reflexology stuff. And yet now we have an opportunity to turn it into something very real and something very positive for the world. Our world's suffering right now. There's a lot of anxiety and depression and so forth. So we're going to be doing stroke, but that's not the end of the story. We're moving on. Stroke is the next round of scans. Then we're going to go on. We're talking about pain and depression and anxiety and PTSD and long COVID and so forth. And we're trying to, and you can participate in giving your opinion as far as what we need to look at next. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Barbara. I'm going to try with my fumbling Zoom techniques to pull up some pictures, but she's going to talk about the different phases of the study. I'm disabled. Why don't we just go ahead?
So, thank you for having us. So first week of April this year, we were at University of Minnesota School of Medicine at the Center for Magnetic Resonance Research. And this was a culmination of 2 years. We raised $25,000 to do this. Then it took 2 years to get the protocols, approval together to be able to go and do it. We call this phase 1. So we spent 3 days scanning feet. That produced 2,000 to 3,000 brain images. And that led to phase 2. Right now we're looking at phase 2. Oh, let me show you a picture.
Yeah.
Here's Kevin getting ready. This is Kevin in front of the scanner. Right now we're involved in phase 2. Okay, phase 2. Now that we've got these images,
Barbara,
yeah.
could you get a little closer to the microphone? People are having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, okay. Now that we're in phase 2, we completed phase 1, scanning the images the first week of April at the University of Minnesota School of Medicine. Now we're in phase 2. Okay, now that we have these images, they have to be assessed. Once they get assessed, an article can be written and published in a scientific journal. Okay, it's at this point that recognition for the study is received. It must be published. So we are raising funds to fund somebody to assess this information. Now, we're very lucky. Dr. Posse and Dr. Yakub Dr. Posse is University of New Mexico. Dr. Yakub was involved at University of Minnesota. They will be doing a preliminary assessment of these scans. We're very fortunate to have this. This will be a shorter process than we originally envisioned. This is what your money is needed for. Kevin mentioned phase 3. We had a little bit of money left over from phase 1, so we will be going to the University of Minnesota sometime this month to work with individuals who've had a stroke. They will be placed in the FMRI machine, the brain scanner. Kevin will work on their feet, and we'll see what happens. The thing that interests the neuroscientists, they will compare the brain scans we took originally, applying to healthy people, to the brain scans of people who've had a stroke. And what happens, a fMRI machine measures blood oxygen levels in the brain. Every time we hear a word, every time we move, every time we see something, a different part of the brain receives this information, and blood oxygen causes an fMRI machine to reflect this. In April, we achieved proof of concept. What happened was, when Kevin worked on the feet, the brain scan showed that pressure to the feet lit up in the appropriate part of the brain, but more happened. This showed that reflexology does more than just apply pressure to the feet. Now, to find out what more happened, we need to assess those 2,000 to 3,000 images. But I will hand it back to Kevin, and he'll tell you.
You know, I got to tell you, the funny part about all that is that when we were in I was in the scanning room getting ready and so forth, it really crossed my mind, this is going to change everything. And, you know, the thing, I've talked to all the different leaders in reflexology and associations and so forth and said, I want you in that room. I want you to be able to test your approaches. And one of the things Dr. Posse and we're talking about is how to develop a methodology so that we can test all kinds of different approaches and see what kind of results we can get. And so, yeah, so what we're trying to do at this point, we've got this treasure trove of scans. They're there, they're done. But now we need to get somebody to interpret them. And we need a very expensive person who's called a postdoctoral. A postdoc is what they short term it as. But basically, the postdoc will go through all those images and come up with what exactly the results are. Now, the interesting thing is Dr. Posse is, he's a scientist, and he's very analytical and so forth, and he doesn't speculate much. But a couple of things he has said, and I have to share these with you. He said he's never seen anything like the results we've gotten. And he also said this will not only change reflexology, it's going to change the way we look at the human body. That's a pretty profound statement I grew up in a scientific family, and he doesn't call himself a neuroscientist. He's actually a physicist, but he has this incredible neuroscience background. At any rate, so yeah, they're very cautious about what they say. But this is what I got to tell you, I'm fired up because we're basically looking at the fact that what's going to happen once we get this kind of approval, once we get the facts out in front of the scientific community. And by the way, Barbara and I are now biomedical research investigators. Okay, sounds big, and we did have to take courses in order to do this, in order to do the scanning. Well, now that we have that under our belt, which, to be honest with you, I hadn't been in school for 50 years, so, it wasn't easy. But at any rate, what it comes down to is that our names will be on the papers, so that reflexologists will actually be on papers that will be in neurological journals. We will now be breaking through on that level. Any questions?
I just want to say congratulations and thank you so much for all that you do. It's just wonderful. And then to be here to explain this to us in such great detail. We're really very, very enthused and behind you 100%.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's been great. I got to tell you, the support from around the world, we're both blown away by it. And I got to say, people are doing wonderful work out there. And I always the example, okay, so one night I get a call from my niece, and you could tell in her voice something was terribly wrong. And it turned out my grandnephew had come down with flesh-eating bacteria. So I spent 23 days in PICU trying to save him. Well, he came out and they do nasty things to you, amputations and muscle stripping and so forth and so on. None of that. He had none of that. And so I see he's now got a daughter. He was 6 years old at that time. He's now in his 30s. And I see pictures of his daughter on Facebook, and it's just such a delight. And you're going, what would have happened if he hadn't made it? She brings great joy to my niece, who actually enjoys being a grandmother. She loves it. Well, what would have happened? And you all have your stories. You all have your events that you intersected with. We have several stroke. And in fact, if you go on my YouTube channel, there was Nadine. Nadine was told that her daughter was told, well, your mother's had a stroke. And then she had another stroke, by the way, because they gave her the wrong meds. And so she said, they told her, just put her someplace nice, warehouse her, as her daughter put it. And that's about all you can do. In 13 sessions, Barbara and I decided we had to go in. Nadine actually sewed Barbara's wedding dress from a picture her daughter had done in a bridal shop. Brilliant lady. And here she is. She can't get her head up off the pillow. And Barbara and I said to each other, we got to do something. So we both went in and we did what the West Texans dubbed the double whammy. Barbara works on the hands, I work on the feet. And so in 13 sessions, 39 days, she walked out of that hospital. She walked out of that hospital. Yeah, she had a walker, but big deal. She was walking. So that, and then there was Charlene. Charlene, I learned how to refine this to bring it down to where you could do it much faster. And so Charlene, within 3 sessions, I got her to move her foot, and I got her to move her leg and move her fingers. And so her caregiver came in, and the caregiver said, well, how are you doing? She said, watch this, and proceeded to show off her moving hands and moving feet and so forth and so on. And the caregiver just burst into tears because she knew what this meant. And so I know you all have your stories, and that's what we want to, validate. Because I did a talk for Rianne, the European group, and I said, well, I did all my little stories, and then I said, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter unless you get scientific validation that what you're doing is for real. And that's what we're up to. And we are lucky. Now, we're moving on to this next phase, the preliminary report, and we got to pay them. Dr. Posse's work without any salary. We've worked without salaries. We paid our own expenses and so forth and so on. And, it's not sustainable. And so if you can even give $10, 10 euros, 10 whatevers, it would help. Because what we're facing is the fact, we can go for government funding, but that's going to take a long time. And then being exposed to Dr. Posse, you got to go through all kinds of hoops. He's right now he's saying, he's got a research project where they're saying, well, we need this criteria. And he's saying, it doesn't exist. What am I going to do? So you got to go through all that. Well, if we could privately fund this. And by the way, once we get through the proof of concept and maybe show some results for stroke and so forth, you're going to have a whole parade of people coming to research reflexology. Now, we're not the first functional MRI study, by the way. But one of the things that a lot of these things have been ignored by science. There's a lot of great studies out there. Don't think we're the first. Far from it. You know, Dr. Manzarinas has done phenomenal work. Carol Samuel did an incredible study on pain and reflexology. Judith Watley has done some great research and so forth. The thing I think will happen with this is once we get this proof of concept out of the way, then we'll be able to give these people the credit they deserve, because they're just like us. They've worked years and years and years, and they've had a lot of dead ends, and they've had a lot of false starts and so forth. So now's our opportunity to really ring the bell.
Kevin, thank you so much for that inspiration. I know there's a few people that had some comments and questions.
Sure.
So I wanted to recognize them. And then maybe you can tell us a little bit more about maybe a little protocol, what we can do
Sure.
to facilitate it as well. But Nancy Frank, I know if you want to unmute yourself, and then after her, Bobby, if you want to go. And anybody else, you can go into chat. And don't forget, all the links to make your contribution are in the chat. So open up the chat, take a screenshot or copy it, so you'll have those links. And not just for you, you share them with your clientele, you share them with your organizations, you share them with your church groups. This is God's work. You know your hands and your feet are blessed, and it's moving God's energy through the body. And so we have to conform to this world, and that's what Kevin and Barbara are opening up to us. So Nancy, do you want to go ahead, unmute?
Oh, it's Linda Frank. I'm not sure
Hi,
how it's
Linda.
shown. That's okay. Hi, Kevin, and hi, Barbara.
I've been meaning to call you. I'm sorry.
Whenever.
Yeah, I've been meaning to call you, but you know, it's just been flooded here.
Sure. Whenever you get a chance.
Okay, we'll do that.
I'm wondering, and you may not be able to answer this yet because it may be dependent on the fundraising, but how soon we might anticipate seeing results, at least perhaps Dr. Posse's preliminary assessment, if it's going.
We think it's going to be 3 months, but these things are always kind of, you know, a little bit jerky as far as how smooth it's going to go. But we're honored. I mean, he's jumping in. He doesn't have to do this. He did his part of it, but he's jumping in. And I mean, the guy's brilliant. We've got that Dr. Posse and Dr. Yoka. I never get that right. Any rate, they're both brilliant scientists, and we've got a great team. I'm sorry, my visuals aren't working at the moment, but we've also got a woman who's a doctorate in physical therapy, and she's worked with stroke. We're actually moving very quickly. We've got the protocol approved in record time for the stroke part of this, phase 3, the stroke part of this. And Anne is part of it. Anne actually even has, you've got to go through certain hoops when you're dealing with people that are considered vulnerable, like stroke patients. You need medical records, you need all kinds of different permissions and so forth. And she's moving all that forward in record time. So yeah, we've got a great team, just a great team. So hopefully, we're trying to put the pedal to the metal. We want this out as soon as possible. Now, the final part may be 6 months to a year, and that's where we get the actual detailed analysis. But as far as getting some preliminary results, I got to tell you, I'm just looking at this going, wait a minute, you know, what's in that data? What is there? Now, and you can go and see on our website or through my Facebook page or LinkedIn or whatever, we actually have some samples of those scans. And when you see those little parts of the brain light up, they have a lot to say. And so I listen to the researchers, you know, I'm kind of eavesdropping, and they're talking about insula cortex. Now, I won't go real nerdy on you, but I got to tell you, insula cortex is our link into psychological aspects of reflexology. There's the parietal lobe that has to do with our integration functions, so forth and so on. And so they're seeing these areas. Now, I was scanned, by the way. As the first part of this, they put me in the scanner to see, you know, they wanted me to visualize area, you know, visualize doing reflexology, and then they scanned my brain as they were doing it. Of course, I always joke, people ask me, what did they find? I said, nothing. But in reality, what lit up was interesting. All the usual areas you would expect, because when you touch your foot, it's going to light up a certain part of the brain. But this was more. And it lit up parts of my brain, like ones that are involved in vocalization. And it also lit up parts of my brain that had to do with facial recognition. Now, the vocalization I can understand, because when I'm working on a pair of feet, I'm thinking I need to work over here, I need to put a little more over here, and so forth, on and on. There's a little chatter going in my brain. But the facial recognition was really curious, and we're still trying to figure that out. So the facial recognition, the only thing I can tell you a real quick story. I was sitting doing a demo in a local health food store. A woman came in, sat down, and I looked at her feet and I said, I've worked on these feet before. She said, you're amazing. You worked on me 10 years ago. You only worked on me once. My neck popped into place. My headache went away. And I always meant to call you back and say, it went well. And so my joke is, I don't recognize your face. I recognize your feet. So who knows what that was, but and the thing about it that's going to be interesting, and Barbara and I, we just did a dry run and already learned things. So what's going to be interesting is those unintended things that we weren't expecting, and we had kind of our prejudice about stroke and how we would approach it and so forth and so on. All that went out the door this week. So that's what I mean. This is always evolving. This is always changing. And by the way, I think of us as all the same tribe. We're all the same tribe. We're all working on the same body, and I mean, so the interesting thing to me is that the people down in, there's a refugee camp down in Malawi. At any rate, it's in near South Africa. And I got contact with this gentleman, and he's got 55,000 refugees, and it's a camp that was designed for 10,000. And so they are basically doing what we're calling community-based reflexology. They're training reflexologists. They're developing. They want books and they want charts and they're just trying to do the best they can. You know how many strokes they're having a week? 200 strokes a week. And you're going, it makes me choke up when I think about that. And you're thinking about, what if we could help? What if we could make a difference? Now we got a laboratory in essence to be able to cause change. And believe me, I know a lot of people would say, I'd rather have a heart attack than a stroke. We watched Nadine. Nadine couldn't get her head off the pillow, and then it was like in stages where you see her suddenly, at one point, Barbara had to hold her water jug up for us to drink. And then by the next week, she was doing it on her own. And the final picture before we have her walking, and it's on the YouTube video, the final picture we have, she's in having her dinner and just, cutting up her meat and so forth and so on. The only thing she couldn't get done, and we had to help her with, was the fruit cup with one of those weird little tops that I can't get open most of the time. So yeah. So no, we've got challenges. I think we have the ability to change the way the world works. As far as governments can't afford, a lot of these people we've been approached at, they can't afford Western medicine. It's too expensive. They need something, and at least we could give them something.
Kevin, not to add to your plate, but if you would consider putting something in the Raw magazine, the deadline is August 20th, about the protocol maybe that you use, if you're amenable to sharing that, or,
No, that'd be great.
that
I might even dictate it to you or something to that effect.
I'm absolutely willing to do that. Please
why don't we set up something? We'll set something up.
Okay,
But
thank you.
The protocol. Okay, so we worked on 5 areas, and let's see if I can do them off the top of my head. Pituitary, eye, basically, adrenal, vagus nerve, and the temporal lobe. 4 of those we got from our practice, over the years. And then the temporal lobe came from several fMRI studies. And so it's an interesting process. Barbara was the timer, so we do 8 seconds of technique application, 12 seconds of rest, 8 seconds, and then you just go on and you go on. Barbara, how long was that we did? She's out of range. We did, I think it was 15 minutes altogether, but I'll get more details for you. But basically, the idea is you need to apply the technique, then you need to rest, because that allows them to see the shift in the brain. And so, we're dying to know what happened with the pituitary, because, my history is I've revived 2 people who showed no signs of life using the reflexology revival point. And in fact, when we were teaching with, back then it was the National Institute of Reflexology. It was the International Institute of Reflexology now, but back then we had people pass out in classes and we'd revive them using that technique. They're out and then they're back. And the funny part about that, by the way, which is why we're dying of curiosity, is I'll tell this very quick story about, this woman, senile dementia. We were working on her husband. Barbara happened to be with me at the time, and I was doing a house call, and the old man had pretty well ticked off every nursing outfit in town. So they weren't terribly professional, because at one point Barbara and I are working on him, and we hear screaming, she's dead, and they all ran out of the room. So here's this woman slumped over in a wheelchair. Barbara's holding her head. It was like a melon. There was no life there at all. And so I'd been watching a show on CPR, and they said, well, next week we'll show you how to do it. Too late. So here we are. I tried mouth to mouth. That didn't work. Then Barbara said, go for what you know. And so I went for, the pituitary area. And I hit it several times on one side, switched the other side, and then she started kicking. At that time, we thought it was just spasmodic type of thing. No. After a while, we figured out I'd hit the walking reflex. That's a whole... Anyway, I'm yelling the whole time. I'm trying to get the foot pedals away from her because I don't want her to injure herself. I'm yelling, Mrs. Wallace, do you know who I am? She said, yeah, you're a jackass. So we knew she was back because she always talked to us that way. And so then the other one was our friend in Ireland, and we still celebrate to this day. He had a rare disorder, and I'm going to try to do a class for the Irish just on this, because apparently the only symptom of it is sudden cardiac death. In fact, they even have a term for how you cry out in the night and then you're gone. Well, this is early one morning. We're staying at Michael's house, and I'm still in bed, and Barbara's up talking to him, and suddenly I hear, Kevin, it's Michael. Kevin, it's Michael. Well, when your spouse says something like that, something really bad's up. So I went running in the room. He slumped over, head back, no signs of life, totally pale. And so I went, there was a beanbag there. I don't know why there was a beanbag there, but there was a beanbag in front of him. So I went for the beanbag 10 times on one foot, 7 times on the other, and he sat right up and he said, Kevin, Deborah was a friend that was staying there. Why are you standing around me? Go back to bed. Now, the really weird part about that story is it was instantaneous. Sat right up and started talking. Same thing with Mrs. Wallace. That's curious. So we've discovered the longest neuron, not nerve, but the longest neuron in the body goes from the big toe joint right up into the brain. No breaks, no synapses, directly there. And so we gotta research that. I lost both my brothers to sudden cardiac death. So, obviously we want to look at that, because I forget, Barbara has the statistics, but the amount of sudden cardiac deaths that occur just in this country and other countries, obviously, as well.
Wow. Now, what reflexes are you working for stroke?
Okay.
Where's your rubber foot?
Very interesting, Linda. You know, this will, you know, from this week, we've already changed our mind about if they want movement, we can find it. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a preliminary, just work on the person to see where we can elicit movement. My normal area, I call it my miracle area because, or magic area. I work a lot on the eye ear area. That's what happened with our quadriplegic. That's when his fingers started moving on the opposite side.
So eye, ear being under the base of the toes.
Yeah, and you want to be right down on top of the metatarsal heads. Yeah, not against the toes, right down on top of the metatarsal heads. And I share that with everybody because I've used that with Parkinson's. I've used that with autoimmune disease. I've used that with, what else? Oh, spinal cord injury, so forth and so on. And if you want to see, on my YouTube channel, I also have it's a young man who came down from Santa Fe, and I worked on his feet, and I just handed the iPad to his wife and said, would you film this? Because as soon as I started, not only with a paraplegic, it's going to be the foot on the opposite side is going to move. With a quadriplegic, it's going to go into the hand. So with him, it's just jumping all over the place. Now that's spasmodic, and that we didn't think counted. But apparently to a neuroscientist, that counts. And you're going, yeah, well, that's easy enough.
Very exciting.
Bobby's trying to get in here. Can you get
Hi.
Bobby?
Yes, I'm here. Hi, Kevin.
Oh,
Say,
good.
where's your rubber foot?
Oh, yeah. Hold on one sec. Excuse
Okay.
me. I meant to get that, but we were having trouble getting hooked up. Here, I'll be right back.
What I want Kevin to show everybody is, because he talks about the temporal lobe, he talks about the vagus nerve, and that's something we don't really talk about unless we get into like some advanced level stuff. So I wanted him to show exactly where those locations are for y'all on the big toe. So I asked him, please have your rubber foot so that he can show everybody.
I did. No, we were fumbling around with. I'm not a proficient at Zoom at this point, so that was a lot of it. Okay, so the area Linda, I was talking with Linda was this area right here. Can you
Pull
see
the foot
it?
up a little more. There we go.
Right through there. And that's when I elicit movement on the opposite side. Whether paraplegic, it would be the foot. Quadriplegic, it would be the hand. So right through there, and the pressure needs to be down, not against the toes, down. And then the pituitary, right here, you know that.
Yeah, that's the one that most everybody knows, the center of the big toe. But we're wondering, you show everybody where the vagus nerve and the temporal lobe.
Okay, now the vagus nerve is the longest nerve in the body. And so it goes from the brainstem all the way down through the abdomen, through the chest and lungs, all down into the abdominal area, and then it spreads out. Vagus from vagrant. So, you know, it basically, this is only a part of the vagus nerve. This is the part that goes through the chest and the lungs. And so this area here is where I work for vagus nerve. Now, by the way, the solar plexus is part of the vagus nerve. So that's why when you get somebody and I love it. They pass out or they sleep. Any rate, that's part of it. Is the vagus nerve is attached into the solar plexus, right through there. Now the temporal lobe, over in here,
Behind the ear. Yeah.
Yeah, and the temporal lobe's involved in a lot of things. It's kind of a crossroads for a lot of different sensory type of things. It's where music and mathematics and so forth. That's why it's a shame they're getting rid of music education in the schools, because they're also impacting mathematics as well. So yeah, so that's that. And then we also did the adrenal, the adrenal. Let's see, what else did I say?
Well, there was another one you told me about yesterday about working the preliminary stroke person, because we know that the 12 cranial nerves are basically at the base of the brain, right up there underneath the nail, right at the on the spinal.
Okay.
And you said underneath the nail.
This is brand new, folks. This is new. But this guy had what they call a basal artery stroke. So the stroke, the clot lodged in his basal artery, and just caused all kinds of problems. But at any rate, so when I was working, I from sense that I needed to work under the nail, and I did, and suddenly his foot started jumping. And so, yeah, guys, we got a chance to be. I mean, we're like Christopher Columbus, although he doesn't have a great rep at this point. But yeah, we have a chance to explore all this stuff, and who knows where it leads. I have no idea. I can't tell you, and I can't tell you the best approach either. That's going to be. We can use technology to get a feel for it, at least.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate your showing us that. I think that means a lot to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well, glad to share.
Someone said they missed the temporal lobe, which is it's situated right behind the ear, and the brain is right here. So it's going to be on your lateral side of your big toe or thumb. So right about here. So that's what he was showing us.
And by the way, you're coming into where the vagus nerve starts. So, the vagus nerve is going to start up around that first joint, and then you go all the way down. And then, yeah, when we're working the abdominal area, that's going to be, you're going to be working the vagus nerve as well. But a more direct, I found with stroke people, they tend to be locked between the joints, first and second particularly.
Locked between which joints?
The first and second metatarsal head.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right between here.
Okay. Now this is on both feet, correct?
Both feet. Yeah, vagus nerve has two branches.
Yeah.
So and I'd say it's interesting because some people are very heavy on the left side, say if they have a lot of cardiac problems, lung problems, so forth, they'll tend to have, at times it's even like almost calcified. It's just, there's no real play between the joints. On some people, it's the right side, so that may be injury related, something to that effect.
Kevin, could you show us that move again and speak? Because the people that are on speaker view, we were seeing Bobby looking at you, but we didn't see the positioning of that. So could you repeat that? And
Okay.
Also, I'm confused on, is it the phalange, the proximal phalange joint in the disc in the metatarsal head, or
yeah, without getting too technical. Okay, so with vagus, I'm going to be working right in here. Okay, and so I'm going to try to, one of the techniques I use is I try to make these joints move. And so this one will tend to be locked with stroke and breathing problems. I knew the inventor of the Buster Brown shoe. He and I would talk all the time. It was really interesting because he and I both came up with the same self-help technique, which is to stand with your feet about shoulder width wide and walk back and forth. And that opens up that joint. And he came from podiatry. I came from reflexology. So, and what was the other part of your question?
I was wondering if it was the phalange joint, what we call the bunion aspect that you're talking about being
more the bunion.
Also show on the both feet where the vagus nerve would come down.
Yeah, they both come right through here on both sides. And it would be the distal metatarsal head. So it would be right between these two metatarsal heads, right there.
Okay.
That do it for you?
Yes. I think. Are there any other questions that people have in here? I think that was what we mainly wanted to get were the protocols for that, and especially a couple of areas where people don't know.
Yeah.
Great.
We'll
Super.
be
Thank
able
you.
to give you more as we go along too.
One
Awesome.
more quick question, Kevin. It looked like you were coming in and working with your fingers on that area. Do you do
That's
that?
not how I'd be doing thumb walking. Now, the other thing I do is like I said, I'm going to be working the joints, just trying to gently move the joints apart. So no, yeah, it's a little tough to work on the bottom of the feet. Now, the other part about it that's kind of curious is I'm wondering about, there's a whole school of thought about working on the top of the feet. And I wondered, because that's what we did this week. Worked on the top of the feet under the nail, and that caused quite a reaction. So, and the revival technique, you go through the bottom of the toe, the base of the toe. I'm wondering about working on the top of the toe underneath the nail, whether that would cause a similar effect.
Lynn Booth, if I may throw
Yeah,
that
Lynn
in.
Booth.
Lynn Booth accesses pituitary from the nail.
Right.
From the middle, from a little bit above the half moon on the nail, and thinking of it going straight through the foot.
See, that's where we're going to get to play. Because I've known Lynn for a lot of years, and she's been really a good supporter on this research project. And you're going, well, great. So we'll be able to go through stuff and discover new things. That's what's exciting to me.
Bill Morby had a question, Kevin.
Hi, Bill. I can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Yeah, Bill, if you would unmute yourself, you can ask your question.
I got a whole sentence out before that came out. Sorry. Isn't the explanation you talked about on the largest toe at the base of the nail something similar to something that Bobby Warren experienced with her mother when she had a stroke?
Yeah, Bobby could answer that better than I can, but I wouldn't be surprised.
I remember a story where she got movement back, but she didn't have any speech back. And of course, Bobby had worked her a million times, but at one point she found a little BB sized knot on the back right there on the big toe. And she worked it, and it finally audibly popped and made a sound. And the very second that sound happened, Muff said, "Well, that hurt," and got her speech back. So I've always worked more on the back of the big toe now than ever, more than ever.
Well, see,
Actually, it was her eyes.
Was it?
Yeah. Yeah, she went blind. And as I was driving her madly back to the hospital, because it happened very quickly, as I'm driving back there, she said, "I can't see." And I drove into the emergency room, and her doctor and neurologist were standing right there. I explained what was happening. My brain was not thinking. And I said, "Please draw me a picture of the brain." So we draw a cauliflower. And he said, "Right at the base of the brain." I said, "Of course, cranial nerves, whatever." So I started searching on the bottom of her big toe, on the bottom. Then I'm thinking, okay, reflexes go all the way through. So I went underneath the nail and I pressed on it with my thumb, and it went pop like a Rice Krispie. It just popped. And that's when she went, I can see. Yeah, it was that quick.
Cool.
Yeah.
I like to hear the official story. That is awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
that's
pretty
my
amazing.
wife-
You were supposed to pay something. Maybe that's why we're not hearing it.
No, she didn't say a thing about change.
My wife and I had an instance where we were at a large convention and an older woman was trying to get out of her seat. She was probably in her 80s. And she said, "I need to get to the restroom. I don't feel good." So I tried to help her up. And when I finally got her stood up, she passed out in my arms, and I had to drag her like a fireman out to the main corridor. And I asked an attendant to run down to such and such seat to get my wife, because I was holding her airway. She was already gray. And so the gentleman went and got my wife, and I told her, I said, "You get the airway. I need the pituitary gland." And so I only did what I knew. My wife's a nurse. And so she held the airway open, and I hit that pituitary gland. And like you said, she jumped back to life. I mean, color came back, and then the paramedics showed up, and they're like, what did you do? I mean, in just a minute
So,
after waking up, she was asking for her purse and her cane and every all of her belongings. So I really love that pituitary reflex.
well, that's okay. So, like I said, I had two brothers pass away in their early 50s from sudden cardiac death. What if somebody was there at the time who could have done that? That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
We have how many years combined experiences here of things like that that could be used and be save lives or change lives.
Mhm.
That's why this is a lifelong dream to Barbara and myself. We want to see reflexology legitimized because we do think it will save lives. It will change lives.
Well, thank you for your
A
work.
wonderful story. Thank you. That's a wonderful story.
Thank you, Kevin. Sincerely, it's how I feel about all these people. And I want to thank everybody for their time coming in today. This is recorded. So if you want to receive the recording with Kevin's permission, of course, Kevin and Barbara, but please put your name in the chat or your email so that your name and your email so we can get that to you. And I'll send you a copy as well, Kevin.
Well, appreciate it.
Kevin, thank you. You're a blessing to all of us. All of you, as Kevin said, are a blessing to the world. And I hope this has inspired you to know that you have that purpose to help people, to reconnect to their body, to their energy that flows through them from the creator above. And this is an exciting time for us. And I want to thank you all for coming. And I'm going to come to a conclusion. So I know we went over a little bit, and thank Kevin and Barbara so much for their time. Encourage your associations, your clients, everybody's family to please donate. And Kevin, from our hearts and just our souls and our feet souls, we want to thank you so much.
You're all a part of this, and I thank you for participating. Yeah, you're going to make a difference. You are going to make a difference, and you've already made a difference, but you're going to make even more difference once we get this done.